All right, our next guest on the Centering Esports podcast, you would have recognized him from casting CS in the past, most recently Valorant. Please welcome to the show, caster extraordinaire dusT. How's it going, sir?
Going all right, dude. Just trucking along as best as you can in this year. I mean, a lot of wild shit going on. So, just coasting through as best as I can.
Is it?
Yeah, it's actually. Oh, go ahead, Tim.
I was gonna say I always ask the generic question to casters when we have them as guests on the show. Is it easier for you to cast? Like, is this year almost easier in the sense of like you don't have to go anywhere, so it's like your options to cast any event is much easier minus the travel, right? Or is it more difficult because it's like everyone and their mother now can now cast because they don't have to worry about travel?
I would say it's more difficult because, for one, there's not as much stuff going on. So, there's not as many operators throwing events in the space. Like, it's kind of confined to a couple particular groups, particularly in Counter Strike. It's basically like what ESL, Blast, DreamHack, and Flashpoint. I mean, it's pretty much just like those four things. And ESL and DreamHack are kind of tied together as one
Yeah.
like umbrella company kind of is over that. So it's basically like three different operators right now in CS:GO that really run events regularly, because a lot of the smaller stuff is just kind of like not there really anymore, except for occasionally. And then obviously even some bigger companies are no longer involved in the mix nowadays. So yeah, I would say it's harder, particularly because, even, though in theory, you could work from home now because, there's no lands and stuff like that. A lot of people still operate within studio spaces, right? So the bottom line is, like, with me living in the USA, traveling to Europe is hard. And then on top of that, you have to quarantine for like 2 weeks prior to whatever you're doing starting. It's something that I know Stunna has done a couple of different times already, because he lives in the US as well, and he's gone over to do things, and you have to do that quarantine. Maybe it's the same way for some of the Canadian guys, Launders and Scrum. I'm not really sure. But no, it's actually made it harder because, again, there's limited operators in the space, and they typically already kind of have crews that they regularly work with. So they're not really looking to expand outside of that regular crew that they usually work with. And because a lot of stuff is in studio, you know, in theory, that kind of cuts me out of a lot of stuff that I used to get. So if anything, it's way harder. Like, I haven't done a CS:GO gig in quite some time. Like, I think the last thing I did was like the Flashpoint season 2 qualifiers, which is like maybe a little over a month ago. And then prior to that, I did like nothing in CS:GO for months pretty much. So, yeah.
Do you see that changing in CS:GO even when COVID is over, or like, because I feel like they are a little bit more stuck in their ways, right? With Valorant, you have a lot more options to explore, a lot more TOs involved. Like, I don't know if the landscape of Counter Strike is really going to go back to maybe the way we saw it in like 2017, 2018, where it felt like there was 10 different TOs involved. From your perspective, do you see it shifting back to that at some point, like maybe after COVID, or is this kind of probably going to be the new routine with Counter Strike?
I mean, I'm sure there will be little offshoot events here and there, but it does seem like the three major operators are going to kind of continue on. I don't really see anyone else coming into the space. Like, there's really no room for a new operator to come in because the three operators we have already take up so much of the calendar. And then the major process, obviously, when that kicks back in, also takes up a good chunk of the calendar. So that's like a fourth operator, basically, even though it's being run by some third party. It's still like a fourth big series going on alongside Flashpoint, EPL, all the different ESL and DreamHack events. I mean, Starlighters basically kaput ever since the whole major debacle that they had. I haven't seen Starlighter really doing anything in the Counter Strike space. Well, it used to be the other really big operator in the space. They're gone. Obviously, others have gone by the wayside, like MLG, Gfinity, Sivo, etc. None of those guys are around anymore. So, I mean, we've seen some stuff from like that We Play company. I think they're out of Ukraine or something like that. They've done a couple of things, and they're pretty cool dudes. And I know that like MDL on like the ESEA side still operates at like a semi-pro level, but yeah, I don't know if anybody else would really get in. Like, there was a couple of different like one-offs we would have here and there. Like, what was that one that was in Greece or something like that a while back? That was like a couple of years
Yeah.
ago now. So there's been like little things like that kind of every now and then just kind of pop up out of nowhere and like throw like a really big event, but sometimes maybe they're like one-offs. Like Epicenter, for example, I think it's only once a year now in Counter Strike. So yeah, it's really hard to say. Like, unless some other company just decides to come out of nowhere and start running like a big LAN or something like that, just because they want to, I don't think things will really change too much in the landscape. It just means we'll go back to playing this stuff on LAN instead of online. But I think it'll still be very similar to what it is now, as far as who's operating and how often you see stuff happening.
Do you think like a part of the issue, I guess, long term within Counter Strike, we obviously have seen the tier two, tier three scenes diminish quite a bit, right? And either they're not getting picked up, so they're moving on to other titles such as Valorant. Is that shift also kind of hurting casting opportunities because like we're not seeing as many of maybe like Fragadelphia might be that one that's still doing like kind of a big tier 2 event, but really outside of them you don't hear of many options. Is that a, how do we change this in the NA scene, I guess you could say?
Yeah, I'm not really sure with the NAC, man. I mean, you're seeing orgs kind of drop left, right, and center as far as giving support to like North American based lineups and stuff like that. We've really only have what like Liquid EG and Gen G left, I think, as far as any organizations that have Counter Strike teams, because Cloud9's obviously gone European for the most part, except for Floppy. And yeah,
Complexity is gone, like all these guys are no
yeah,
longer
complexity's
NA.
all pretty well. Yeah, complexity's pretty much international as well. So yeah, I mean, a lot of the NA orgs just aren't really there anymore. Now you're even seeing some of the smaller ones pull out like Chaos and stuff like that just recently. So I'm not really sure what the solution is there. I'm not sure if organizations will come back to North American Counter Strike at some point in the future post COVID when it makes more economic sense to them, or if they rather just focus their sights elsewhere. Something like Valorant, for example. That's where a lot of the NA talent seems to be going as well, right? Like a lot of the young, like, don't get me wrong, a lot of people talk about how Valorant's like a CSGO retirement home because there are like a lot of CSGO veterans that operate in Valorant. Think about guys like Hiko or Steel or some of these guys who are like, approaching 30 years old or maybe just over
FNS,
30 years old.
Cutler, like there's a
Right, right,
handful of
right.
them. Yeah.
Right. But I mean, there's even some of those guys that were still had value in CS. Like Nitro could have easily participated, I think, still at a top level in Counter Strike.
But the issue there was there's just no options. Like you said, we're so
Right.
limited on NA options. If you're not willing to go international, you're kind of SOL at that point.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And I mean, so a lot of the younger CSGO people who still could have brought value to CS, like a Wardell or Nitro or some of these other guys, they don't really see a future in North American CSGO either. And then that also means that the young guys, like maybe people in their teens and stuff like that, who are maybe currently competing in Mountain Dew League, and are stripped of ever really being able to get into any of the professional leagues unless they somehow qualify for like Flashpoint or maybe something like that. I'm not really sure down the line. Yeah, it basically puts them out. Like at this point, what do you do? Like if you see that there's actually a way to have a career in Valorant as opposed to sitting in Counter Strike with no support anywhere to be found, it's pretty easy to make the decision at that point. So I'm not really sure what the future holds for NA. I mean, maybe it's just going to be some type of reset similar to what happened like in the post CGS era of Counter Strike. Maybe we will eventually see that next year when things start to settle down COVID wise, if things start to settle down COVID wise. But yeah, it's hard for me to really put a thumb on it.
So for you then personally, because we kind of saw the same thing as players when Valorant came out, players switched over. We saw casters and analysts kind of do the same, right? We're seeing them double dip in both games and everything like that.
Mm-hmm.
As a caster, do you find more opportunities in Valorant as of yet, or is that still kind of only reserved because Riot's kind of been the only one throwing the big events?
Well, I mean, a lot of the time, the third party operators are the ones who are deciding talent for these events, not necessarily Riot. Now, Riot probably did determine the talent for the main First Strike events, but the qualification process and any other tournament that you've seen in Valorant has all been decided by whatever organizer's operating the
Nerd
tournament, right?
Trader, UFG, or
Yeah,
whoever.
nerd,
Yeah.
exactly. And so honestly, I mean, the ideal world is to double dip, right? Is to work in both if you're capable of working in both. Like if you have the skill set, the knowledge, the experience, all that good stuff to do both. Ideally, that's what I would do. But the problem I found within the Counter Strike side of things, for me personally at least, is that pretty much every operator already has like a group of people that they work with regularly. They don't really look outside of that group. So like you go, look at Blast, for example, like Launders and Scrawny are kind of the face of that, I think. And obviously they have Anderson Similar and stuff that will work for Blast. And they have a couple of other, like Harry and Hugo's maybe done some Blast stuff. I'm not really sure. Then obviously the face of ESL kind of has become Harry and Hugo in a lot of ways. But then they also still have Machine, who worked with Pansy, I think, most recently and has in
Mm-hmm.
the past. And I'm not sure what Machine will do going
Sponge and all
forward.
that. Yeah.
Exactly, Sponge, all that. So that's kind of the face of that. Then you go over the Flashpoint side of things, and that's where you have like James Bardolph. That's where you have Anderson Similar, who kind of dip between Flashpoint and Blast, I guess, in that regard. And then DreamHack is kind of like a hodgepodge, like, that they also work with Scrawny Launders, Harry Hugo, some of these other regular guys, but they also kind of bring in new people sometimes and try new things out and experiment. So with that said, I can't really get a foot in a lot of the CSGO stuff because, again, like, why would you look outside who you already have if you're happy with what you got?
Just
And if they're
undercut
available
the
to work for
shit
you.
out of them, dusT. You come in, say like 15% less. Just
Yeah,
undercut the shit out of them. Do it.
I mean, they're not even talking to me for me to undercut. You know what I mean? Not that I would do that anyway, but yeah, I mean, maybe Flashpoint might be something in the future for me because I did their season 2 qualifiers with Vince and all that good stuff. And Vince and I think we make a good duo as far as commentating CS:GO goes and Valorant. But DreamHack was like really the only company that was really hiring us together regularly, and even they weren't hiring us together that often, and now they don't at all. So yeah, to me, CS:GO kind of feels like a dead end, for me at least. Like it's something I still love and adore, and something I'm still very much interested in, and something I've been a part of for many years. But at the end of the day, when enough doors get slammed in your face, I mean, what the fuck are you supposed to do at that point? Like I can't crowbar my way into an opportunity. I think, you know,
We talk about it all the time, like how tough that would be in the talent pool for Counter-Strike because we call it the boys club jokingly on the show. Is it is like there's a core group of people and they're very good at what they do. Take nothing away from them, obviously. They're very
of
good and
course,
that's why
yeah,
they're working with these guys. But there is like a core group that continuously gets hired on and we don't know. We always talk about how difficult it would be just for new talent to get in. Kind of on the flip side with Counter-Strike, if you're, you talked about MDL players potentially even looking to switch over to Valorant. I'm worried about people even younger than that. If you're 13, 14 years old and you're trying to figure out FPSs and a direction you want to go, could you give me right now one good reason why you should pick Counter-Strike over Valorant?
I mean, it just depends on what you like personally, right? I mean, I think here's the thing: like the CS:GO player base is still sky high.
Mhm.
It's not an issue
Well,
with player count, and when it comes
outside
to
of the
Counter Strike.
game, right? Like I'm talking about in the terms if you're looking for potential growth within a career for one of the two games. I just find it so hard to say, hey, Counter Strike is the way to go because I feel like not only from a talent side is it hard to break in, also from a player side, like you see very few up and comers, right? You've had Stewie, you've had Rops. Now we see like somebody like Grims, but the fact that I feel like we can name so many of them is a little concerning because there isn't a lot of fresh faces kind of rolling through the scene. Zywoo might be another great example of that too, but
Mhm.
it's really been a pretty consistent grouping of people. I feel like if I was young coming in, I'm making my way to Valorant right now. Like I see the dollar
Yeah.
signs over there.
I mean, I guess it just depends on like what game hooks you more. Like what game are
Yeah.
you into more? Because obviously Counter-Strike is like more their bare bones classic, and Valorant is like something that's kind of built on top of that, with all the abilities and agents, and kind of like adding MOBA-ish elements or something like that to what a classic FPS is, which Counter-Strike is basically just a raw classic FPS all the way through and through. So it kind of just depends on what you're into, I guess. I mean, both are free, both are just as accessible. So at that point, you just have to kind of decide what you like best. I mean, I would never steer anyone in either direction. I would just say try both and see what you like best and go for it. Like follow your passion. But yeah, it is true that there's a lot of frustrations in the CS scene. For one, it's like you said, kind of closed off at this point, and for two, you got Valve who doesn't give a flying fuck about the game, from what I can tell, and it doesn't seem like that's going to change anytime soon. They're just basically asleep at the fucking wheel, and everyone praises Valve like there's some type of god every time they release a new operation, which happens like once a fucking year. So
I
I
was
don't know
just about
what
to
those
say.
guys do on a daily basis, bro. Like they must just fucking sit around and play Dota 2 because like
All day.
I mean, what, like it must be the easiest job in the world being a CS:GO dev because you literally don't do shit for months on end until you finally release like one little patch. Like I just have such a pessimistic view. I used to try to be more reasonable, and I used to even try to maybe not like defend or stick up for Val, but when people would just basically say, "Oh, Val don't care about the game," and whine about that, I would be like, "Ah, that's a little bit, hyperbole, isn't it? Like that's a little bit of an exaggeration." But now I'm like, "Fuck, man, you might be right. They might not give a shit because like nothing happens." I mean, it's taken the release of Valorant for them to even communicate more regularly on social media and things of that nature. So I mean, it's hard for me to have much faith, in the future of the game when I'm seeing what I'm seeing in the scene, and I'm seeing how Valve treats the game, or lack thereof, I guess you could say. And so yeah, it's definitely hard to get excited about it, just because of that. Other than if you just love the game because the game is great, and the game is great,
Well, that's
at
why
the
I
core.
think people are so defensive about Counter Strike, including us, is because we love Counter Strike.
Right?
I don't love what Valve has done for
Does
the game.
anyone?
These operations are, I mean, in my mind, they're pretty shit. Like, I don't know how people feel about them. Like, it's not enough to get me excited enough to maybe stop playing some of the. I'm playing WoW right now. I'm playing Valorant right now. Like, an operation wasn't enough to be like, oh, let me go try Ancient and see how I like this new original map when I know there's 10,000 maps they could buy at some point if they wanted to. Like that would show me more that they cared if they invested in the maps and all that. But yeah, like I find it very hard to say that Valve.
I mean, operations are just money grabs. I mean, I mean, it's just
Oh, it
recycled
is.
content as well. I mean, it's
Yeah.
recycled content.
Well, it's
So, I
even
mean, if you're
here.
into that, cool. But I mean, to me, I think people give Valve way too much credit when they release an operation. Like they just did some amazing thing. Not
Because you
really. They
wait a
recycle.
year in between.
Yeah. I mean,
Well, it's like you look at other games nowadays, and the battle pass has just become a standard, right? Seasons have become a standard where you
yeah.
just kind of come accustomed. Where some games are a month, 2 months, 3 months, whatever their season is. It's a schedule, and they
Hmm.
release new content every season, whether it's maps or agents or whatever, rank
Hmm.
reset. It gives you a reason to go back. Anuj and I have complained, I feel like forever now with CS, where it's like, if you take a break, your rank is shot, destroyed. The matchmaking is horrendous. So unless you go
Yeah.
and play Face It or something like that, you're just not going to have a good time.
Yeah, but here's the difference. Like the battle pass, you can't just crowbar that in, many years down the game's life cycle. Like you have to have that in mind when you develop the game. So games like Apex Legends, games like Valorant, that they were developed with that already in mind, and the way that they implemented it was fine. No one really complained. So then, like maybe the price being too high for certain cosmetics or something like that. Whereas Counter Strike, you're almost kind of crowbarring in a whole different system because they decided to go free to play a few years back. And I don't have anything against the operations. Like some people really enjoy it. Like they really enjoy playing the missions and like unlocking new stuff and all that. Like I'm not necessarily against it, but I don't think you should be overly crediting Valve like they've done some amazing thing every time they spit out an operation, because at the end of the day, they still spit in the face of the competitive scene relentlessly. So, and that's what gets eyeballs on the game, by the way. Like it's not like people are just finding CS:GO on Steam just out of nowhere. No, they probably watched some type of esports event, thought the game looked good, and wanted to give it a shot 'cause it was free.
Yeah,
You know
we
what I mean?
we say the
So
same thing too, like recently with Nintendo and Smash. Like how Nintendo pretty much shits on the Smash scene the
oh,
whole
yeah,
time.
all the
And it's
time.
like no one is playing Melee today if it weren't for their esports side. No one.
Yep.
Like no one is still sitting at home calling their buddies and being like, guys, do you want to come over and play Melee, a game that came out 15 years ago? Like no one. It's the esports propping it up. And I do think I agree with you. I think developers take that it to their advantage, right? They take advantage of the competitive side of it.
Yeah.
Switching over then to actual pro Valorant, because obviously you keep up with it. We just had First Strike finish up. We talked about it last episode
Mhm.
about the results and everything. Obviously, ahead of time, Anuj and I both said, hands down, 100 Thieves is going to win it. No doubt. No doubt. We both said easy win for 100 Thieves. Were people underestimating or did they overperform?
I mean, here's the thing. When I watched 100 Thieves play leading up into First Strike, I was pretty impressed with how they were approaching the game with this new lineup. But granted, you didn't really have a whole lot to go off of with this new 100 Thieves lineup, right? I mean, I think that the only thing they had really played was this First Strike qualification process and First Strike, right? Like, I don't think they even had played anything else prior to that. Like,
Yeah.
I think even like one of the yeah, I think it was just a qualification process for First Strike, right? So
Yeah.
the problem is the
Yeah.
sample size you had to go off of to critique or really understand 100 Thieves was quite limited. Like you really had to kind of do a little bit of guesswork or kind of speculate whether or not they could actually consistently perform the way that you were seeing. The thing that I noticed right away though is that they were strategically sound. Like that's like the first thing that you had to pick up on right away. Like they had structure, they had pretty well defined roles on like who was more supportive, who was more of like a star player, who was more of like in a carry role, all that good stuff. And so yeah, like they had really good structure, and I knew they would because I know Steele and I know how driven that guy is to win, and I know that he has a great mind for competitive gaming, and I knew that there was no way this team was going to come out looking sloppy. I mean, I've seen Steele do miracles, particularly his whole CS:GO career post match fixing scandal when he came back and was whipping teams up of players that you would have never thought would do much and actually getting them into qualification for elite level events, right? So I had no question about that. And it was very evident from like game one that they definitely had some good tactics. And I think what you'll find now, and I mean, this is debatable, I think, but I think 100 Thieves outside of Sentinels might be the most skilled lineup man for man of any lineup in North America. I mean, don't get me wrong. There's like a couple of really big players out there, like a Tens, for example, over at Cloud9, a couple of other players here and there that you could say might be better than some of the guys on 100 Thieves skill wise. But if you're just like lining up 5 versus 5, I think the only team that outskills 100 Thieves is Sentinels. So the fact that they have that much skill, like maybe number 2 in the region, and they're also structurally sound, yeah, they're going to be a heavy hitter. Now, don't get me wrong. I thought Sentinels would still have a pretty good shot at beating them and going on to the finals. I do think that obviously they had an issues where they couldn't really practice. Shazam had the whole death of his father situation. That obviously adds like this extra, caveat to it all. Where if that situation wouldn't have been there, maybe Sentinels could have been better prepared, and maybe they would have had a better shot at the semifinals. But it's still a really close series when it was all said and done, right? Um, so yeah, it's hard to say. Like I always hate trying to harp on, external factors that we would have no idea, if things would be any different if those weren't there or not.
Mhm.
But I think you had to at least expect 100 Thieves to like make the semis. Like I think they certainly. I mean, they had to play T1 though, which is like another really good up and coming team. By the way, I think T1 was the best team that didn't make semifinals at that event. I think they're still a top 5 team, even though they fell out top 8 in
Really,
this
you
event.
think
But
that highly of See, I'm not a T1
yeah,
believer. I'm not. I've on record. I'm not a T1 believer. So I'm surprised to hear that.
they're tactically one of the best teams in the region. Like I think tactically speaking, the best teams in the region are probably Sentinels, 100 Thieves, Envy, and T1. So at that point, it just comes down to like individual performance and consistency of performance. And I think that obviously Sentinels have talent in spades. So does 100 Thieves. I think Envy definitely is right up there though. And here's the thing: like TSM also does have a lot of talent. Like that trio of Drone, Wardell, and Sabrosa is powerful, powerful. And it's not like they're lacking any at all strategy. I'm just a little bit more impressed with the tactics of some of the other teams that I've mentioned, but compared to TSM, but TSM has enough talent and enough tactics to still be a top 3 team in the region. But I do think T1, again, I think they're the best team in the top 8, from that event. Like what? You're putting them against Immortals, Renegades, and FaZe Clan. I think T1's better than all 3 of those teams for sure.
Yeah, I'll give you
Yeah,
that.
with those 3, I would agree. I think where Tim and I have either butted heads at times or sometimes even agreed is just like they're almost like they're in between the top 5 teams in the world, but then there's like that kind of that fall off of some of these
Well, I'm just
teams that
speaking
you just
within NA,
mentioned.
by the way. I don't like doing world.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm sorry, I'm
Yeah,
saying world.
Yeah,
I mean
just
NA.
making sure.
NA is the world right
Let's
now
be
for
real.
us.
NA is the only thing that matters for Valorant. Let's be real.
No, but I'm having a hard time figuring out with T1, like, can they beat the best teams, right? Like, I know they can beat the Immortals, the FaZe Clans, like the Mamba Mode Gamings, like they'll beat these guys. I want to see more consistency when they play like the Sentinels, TSMs, Envy, who kind of surprised me a little bit early on in the sense of I thought they would be good. I didn't know they would be this good kind of thing. Kind of feel the opposite about T1, where I thought they would be really good, but I feel like they've like just disappointed me a little bit in how they've played.
I
I
mean,
would
since they got Daze and Spider on board, all they've played, I think, as well as the first try qualification process, correct? They played like Nerd
Yeah,
Street,
since Spider
UMG.
and Days came on board. I
Yeah,
mean,
their 2 losses are Sentinels and 100 Thieves. Like, and they took a map off Sentinels, and they did double digits both maps against 100 Thieves in the quarterfinals of first strike. I mean, that's pretty fucking good, in my opinion. That's a crazy turnaround from what they were. They were
definitely
like a
got to
group
give
stage exit team before that.
definitely got to give these teams time. Like I get that,
Yes.
but kind of all of these teams probably you could say that for at the end of the day, right? Like they struggled really bad against complexity. They've had a tough time, just kind of looking through their. It's tough because they have the 2 new additions. It looks even worse though when Food and Crashies move over to Envy, and all of a sudden Envy becomes a juggernaut. Like I almost wonder what the issue was and why they couldn't make it work with
No
them.
IGL at T1. Didn't have one, right? I mean, not a classical one. Maybe they had guys attempting it, but they didn't really have like they didn't have true leadership on that team, in my opinion. I think that's what they were missing. That and there was like crazy role overlap between Crashies and Brax, I think was another big problem that they were having.
Well, no, it was what's it called? Skadoodle took his player break to go
That too.
practice
That
and
was a
whatever.
third
Yeah,
factor. That was like the
yeah.
third big factor. But I
That
think there was also the issue of Braxton Crashes having role conflict. I think there was an issue they didn't really have an in-game leader.
So I think that's
So
part of the reason why I'm not a fan of T1 is because I felt like the Skadoodle player break was almost like sabotage for the roster to make the moves to get the other players in. Because
I have no idea.
like who does that?
I wish I knew what that was all about. I don't know.
Like who?
Because
Like,
their whole reason was like to let him get better. Well, couldn't he just get better? I'm still playing on the team.
that's what we were like.
Yeah.
He was like,
I
I
do
want to
wonder
work
if
on
maybe
my.
there was another roster move that might have happened that didn't, and so they brought him back. Like I don't really know. Like all I could ever do is speculate on that. I
Right,
hate to
of
touch that
course.
because I have no idea. But and it goes back to this, by the way, is like the whole sample size thing. The sample size is still really small for this new T1 lineup. For all we know, they could crash out their next couple of events, and maybe this was like maybe like fluky that they did as well as they did. But I don't think so. When I watched them play, I was impressed.
As far as then looking at other teams that didn't perform well at first strike, well, I guess whatever your definition of performing well, they didn't qualify for the finals, right? I always look at teams like Cloud9. You've mentioned it, tens, right? It's tens and friends. That's the running bit with Cloud9. What are your thoughts on them? Because I know they're coming up in whatever that tournament is this weekend. I forget the name of it, but
Yeah, I mean, Cloud9's a tough one because I think the whole Tens and Friends thing is a gross, like, oversimplification of Cloud9. And I think most people deep down know that that's true and they just kind of
Yeah.
meme on it. They definitely had more than just Tens. Like, I think Relics was a pretty strong player for them individually. Same with Mitch. I think Vice was a great supportive element. He was like one of the better breaches in NA, in my opinion, as far as like setting up his teammates, stuff like that. I think only other person I would really put up there is like AZK and CP2 as like other guys who were really playing the breach very well in the games that I watch. So I mean, I think that they had a lot going for them. I think Shinobi was operating the team really well strategically. I mean, Cloud9 actually kind of innovated on a couple of different maps, like different things that you could do at different agents. Like I think Mitch was the first person I saw using his turret as Killjoy to peak angles and on attacking side as like a kind of a artificial entry fragger, basically to just throw your turret out there to get the angle first, then you actually swing it because you know it's safe. So he was like one of the first people really doing that because most people prior were just like leaving the turret behind to watch flanks and stuff like that on attacking side. So I've seen Cloud9 push the meta and do things strategically, which maybe part is Shinobi, part might be their coaching staff, part might be like Relics, who I know is like a guy who does a lot of secondary calling or did in the past. I think he was even an in-game leader a couple different times in CS:GO. So I can't really know for sure like how much credit to give a person, but I'll just say Cloud9 operated like pretty well strategically, in my opinion, as well. I think they were like the one of the best teams that weren't in first strike in that regard.
Yeah, them and
Um,
Gen G really were the 2 big ones that were not
mhm.
involved at the end.
Yeah, so I don't know though what Cloud9 does going forward because these were some really hefty losses they took in these qualifiers to teams that they should not have lost to. Like the Renegades one was like shocking. That was the Nerd Street qualifier, and then UMG they lost to I'm trying to think T1, right?
Yeah.
So I think the T1 loss, like in retrospect now, I think you can look at it and realize that T1 truly was a good team. And so that was like a pretty good fight. But the loss to Renegades, even though I think Renegades might be a little bit better than some people give them credit, I think Cloud9 still should have won that. And what was odd to me in particular was that they were just making these weird comp changes that I wasn't like really following. Like I think what they switched Vice off of Breach on Ascent, even though he was really effective with Breach on Ascent, and then they wound up losing Ascent multiple times ever since they did that switch. So I don't know. Like I don't know if they got in their own heads, if things weren't going well in practice, if they just wanted to try new things, or it just seemed like they weren't themselves though. Like they looked way sloppier in how they were approaching things than what I'm used to.
Still a ton of experimenting going on, and kind of like we saw with the finals here. I kind of want to get your quick thoughts on the new agent Sky and the new maps Icebox. A lot of controversy around Icebox at least. But any kind of initial feelings towards the new character and new map?
I think Sky's interesting because obviously she I don't know, like I don't think she's quite a breach replacement. It almost feels like she's more of a Sova replacement. At least that's how I'm seeing her used by a lot of teams because essentially people are using her. It's called a fucking Tasmanian tiger. I can't believe that, by the way. Like that's a mouthful. Like, can we?
They
Everyone calls it
dropped
a
the ball
dog,
on
but I
that
mean,
one.
Dog. It's a
yeah,
dog.
everyone calls it a dog, but it's just like, come on, man. Anyway,
Could
getting
you
away from that.
imagine?
That's a
Could
little.
you imagine?
I'm being.
Put yourself in a casting situation. It's like a one-on-one final
I'll never say it.
situation. Oh, that Tasmanian devil. Like you can't do
Never
that.
happening.
You can't.
Never
That's
happening.
not gonna roll off the tongue.
No, not at all. I mean, it's just the same for a bunch of other abilities. Like, I'm not gonna say dark cover. It's an omen smoke. You know what
It's
I mean?
smoke.
Like,
Yeah.
Smoke.
you
Yeah.
know. So, and I think everyone's kind of on the same page in that regard. But anyway, getting back to Sky, I think basically people are using her dog as like kind of inferior drone. Like, I mean, it's nearsighted. It can't do as much as a drone as far as getting complete information, but it still can get you some information, and it can stun if it actually encounters something. So that's great. She can do some AoE healing. It's not amazing, but it's something. And if you're not using Sage and you want to have some level of heal, I mean, obviously, like Phoenix and Reina has sustains, but as far as like actually healing teammates and stuff like that, yeah, she's great for that too. And her flashes are effective. They're not as effective as Breach or Phoenix flashes, but they can still, in the right hands, if you learn like good flight trajectories, you could definitely still make them very effective. Even though I guess they can be destroyed, so there's a little bit of give and take on that, but more often than not, that they're effective. So I don't know. Like I think that you could swap her in for Sova in some instances and have some heals and some extra flashes, especially if you'd rather run another duelist rather than running breach. Like it's really tough because I mean, pretty much every map except for split, you're running a Sova, right? So that's kind of like locked in. Right now, the jet meta is still all the craze. I'm not sure how long that'll last, but you're typically going to have at least one duelist, if not two. Some teams even run three.
Yeah.
And so if that's the case, you know, usually a team will also run one of Killjoy or Cypher, usually not both, but at least one of those two. And so at the end of the day, you only have like one agent slot left, and it's like, well, do I want to burn it on a breach, or do I want, like, to make sure that I have a sentinel, or to make sure that I have like a second duelist if I'm playing my Sova? So it gets tough. And I mean, I think breach is a great agent to have, but sometimes people would rather just run a Phoenix, to have those flashes instead and have another duelist. And so it's just like, well, man, we want like another supportive agent besides our Sentinel, which is your Cypher, your Killjoy. So what should we play? And I think it will come down to, it's usually swap map to map. Like what Cutler, I think, played all three agents
Yeah.
in First Strike. He played Sky once, Sova probably a couple of times, and I think he obviously played Breach, I think maybe once or something like that. So I think that's the decider. Which of those three agents do you want to pick? And it just depends on the map and what you think's most effective for your team, because everything else is kind of locked in. I mean, people will rotate between Raze, Reyna, and Phoenix, sure, but usually you're getting one of those three. You're getting a Jet.
They're serving the same
Yeah.
purpose.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's tough. I think Sky is a cool agent, though. I just think that she's slightly inferior to her. Put it this way, she's like an inferior version of Sova and Breach combined. Like her flashes are inferior to Breach's, but still pretty good. Her dog is an inferior drone, but still pretty good. And she has AoE heals
You
too.
can get a lot of the same stuff done, just maybe
Yeah.
not as effective
Yeah. She's
as
like a
some of
weird
those
smash up of
agents.
those two agents, in my opinion.
So switching gears from Valorant to CS again. Don't know if you've noticed, but we have ourselves like a little civil war going on.
Yeah.
I mean,
Wild, right?
it's who would have thought? Who like I'm seeing what I thought were friends going at each other on Twitter, and it's fascinating. I'm kind of curious then on your take as someone who's been in the CS scene, as just from a like these were your colleagues, right? Like now you're seeing it from an outsider perspective. Is it? Let me ask you this, because from the outsiders, from us outsiders, I thought everything was kumbaya and these guys were all buddies in between Scoots and Thorin and Richard Lewis and
Well, Scoots and Thorn have been kind of pecking at each other a little bit lately. It's been going on for a few months now. I feel like they've been kind of. This is the worst I've ever seen it, though.
yeah,
I thought prior the pecking they were doing back and forth could like be rectified, like that could be a bridge that could still be rebuilt, because they do have a deep history together, and I think deep down they have a deep respect for each other's like abilities. Like I think Thorn would still tell you to this day that Scoots is a good desk host, and I think that Scoots to this day would still say that Thorn's a good entertainer and analyst. But I don't know if that bridge can be salvaged now after what I saw today. Like things are getting really out of hand, and it kind of is mind blowing to me. I feel like people are associating particular individuals with particular identities that maybe is a little bit more of a gray area than making it as black and white as it's being made out to be. Um, I do almost wonder if there's like miscommunications there, and I would really rather these people just sit down and talk to each other rather than just firing off, 140
Twitter
character
war.
tweets at each other. Yeah, like it just feels like a lot of sniping. Nothing productive or meaningful really ever happens through those Twitter exchanges. Like it just
no,
gets way too sloppy. And you never really get to provide the context that you really should be able to when you're trying to make these particular arguments or thoughts. And so that's one end of it. Like I really wish it didn't have to get that nasty between people, because I respect both of those guys. Like Scoots has always been very friendly to me, always been very helpful to me. I've never had any issues with the guy. He's done a lot of great things for the scene, in my opinion. And then I look at someone like Thorin, who I know is very polarizing and sometimes can be quite an asshole on Twitter and stuff like that. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and defend everything that the guy says and does, but at the end of the day, my relationship with him has always been fine. Like he's always usually been kind to me. He's helped me out in a few situations. So it's one of those things where it's tough because I don't want to get in the middle of that because, I have respect for both guys. Does that mean I agree with everything that both guys do? No, of course not.
right.
But yeah, like that's kind of an awkward one for me, given, how I know both those people.
In your mind, does the Players Association hold the value that I think the outside perceives it to?
I'm confused about that whole situation, by the way, because like we can maybe talk through this. Maybe you can help me understand it better. But from what I can tell, players had concerns about their communications being used by tournament operators for like live broadcast, like listen ins and stuff like that. Like maybe a random round they just decide to listen in, or maybe they use it for like side content. Like show like the reaction of a team when they won or
Yeah.
lost or something like that, or just different things, right? Like different pieces of content or something like that. Like I know that sometimes they do like even like compilation videos where they like, take a bunch of different team communications from like particularly big rounds or something and kind of put them all together in one video, whatever
Mhm.
the case may be. So at the end of the day, I think we can all agree, I'm pretty sure there's like a big consensus on this, that that is amazing stuff to use for content because it provides amazing insight that we cannot get any other
Right.
way.
Yeah,
And it creates like a bit of extra flavor, drama, or excitement to a
Well, look at
broadcast to have
like
access to that. Everyone will agree to that, right?
yeah, because look at like traditional sports, NFL
Right.
films, behind the Winter Classic. Like everyone loves those.
Yeah, of
You know
course.
the F1
I think
show
we
hard
can
on
hard
also
Netflix.
all
knocks, like all that stuff. People
yeah.
love behind the scenes type stuff, and
So we
so
all can agree that that's good for broadcast, good for content. We can all agree to that. But we can
Correct.
also all agree that if used irresponsibly, it can jeopardize competitive integrity
for sure,
because you might be leaking a team's strategies, you might be leaking some type of internal argument a team's having. You can definitely cause some big problems if you release certain elements of those communications, particularly if you are really poor on the timing of when you release it. So I think we can all agree to that too. And so I think at the end of the day, we all agree that there could be some really amazing middle ground where you compromise how you use the communications to get great value out of it, but not jeopardize competitive integrity or piss teams and players off.
Yeah.
Right. So I don't understand like why this is so difficult to implement. You know what I mean? Like it seems pretty simple to me that players, their teams, and the CSPPA should all be able to sit down and come to a decision on how these things can and should be used. And then they should be having meetings with tournament operators. And that should be a part of whatever agreements that they're signing with the tournament operator.
I think
So,
part of the issue is for everything that you said just a couple minutes ago. The communication. There's a disconnect, and in this
yes.
case, you have a disconnect between the tournament organizers, the orgs themselves, the teams, and then the players. Like there's three disconnects of communications, and then it all just forms up on Twitter where the player's going to take a shot at the TO, and then the team's in this awkward situation where it's like, look, I want to back my boy, but the TO is kind of also the one who is going to give me a paycheck, right? So
Mhm.
it's this awkward communication, and then you have this person yelling at this person on Twitter. This guy calls this person a moron. This guy calls this person evil. And then it gets blown up. And then 10 posts on Reddit later, then everything's just
Yeah, and
The
it gets
funny
confusing because then that whole letter thing came out today where like all the teams came together and like
yeah,
basically released this public letter
Yeah.
saying that they had basically already saw this problem with Blast back in like late November, right? So I mean, but here's the problem. That might just be the team owners and the TOs, not the players necessarily,
right.
right? So that might be where the disconnect is that like maybe these two parties agreed to everything, but this third party over here didn't. But the thing is, it just seems like even the players who's in the CSPPA, there's not a whole lot of chatting going on. Like there's way too many public complaints coming out about players basically saying they've had no say or vote in any of these situations. Whether that be even just tier one players, but
Yeah.
also obviously anyone thing below tier one apparently has like no real say or no real information, like
They
based
don't
on
even
things I've
get
seen Davey say.
they don't even get a
So
newsletter
yeah,
below
so
T1.
that's what I don't understand. Like, there's some type of disorganization issue at that point if these players aren't informed about what their own association is saying and doing on their behalf. Like, I don't know what's going on there, and that's why I don't want to get in the middle of it because I don't really understand it. I'm kind of just confused as probably a lot of people are. But something's going on there because I feel like this could be a easily resolved issue. And I'll say this: no matter what, you the way that this was handled was so bad because there should never have had that boycott that day on day one of Blast. That should have
no,
never
that was
happened.
terrible.
That's absolutely fucking ridiculous that you would do that. Like, if you're gonna take a stand, I get it if you want to boycott something, but where were the fucking boycotts when people's careers are getting fucking thrown away by like horrible decisions by teams getting removed from a league system, or when people are getting unjustly banned for years or forever? And like, where the fuck were you then to like step up whenever it was coming to defending someone's
Non-existent,
career? Non-existent. But
non-existent.
but now this is the hill you're gonna die on like how comms are used in a broadcast. Like, give me a break. And then, even if that was an issue, you can resolve that without ruining the product. You're relying on that product too. That product is like that's a partnership that these teams have with this organizer, and you're jeopardizing it long term because Blast has deals, I would imagine, with other broadcasts. They circulate this elsewhere. It's not just on Twitch and YouTube. They broadcast it in like European country TV stations. You're jeopardizing all that. which jeopardizes the whole project. And look, I'm no like huge fan of Blast. It's not like there's some moral arbiter of the scene with all the shit that they were doing with Neon, but like we won't get into that. That's kind of brush under the rug. They've broken that. So it's not like I'm saying that like Blast are some like saints or something like that. But at the end of the day, you can't jeopardize the long term over a short term issue. You know what I mean? Like they have fiscal responsibilities with their partners that they have to uphold, and pushing a broadcast back several hours because of a stupid boycott, that ain't it. Like you're jeopardizing that. So that we can, I think that that is silly. I will say that.
And
I have no dogs in this fight, and I'll tell you, my opinion is the CSPPA a little bit of a joke. Like they are more of a PR company than I feel like a true players association. I don't feel like they truly have the voice of all the players, and I also think the players need to do a better job of understanding their contracts because most likely this is in their contracts where their likeness or whatever
Yep.
can be negotiated by their org, right? And so if this is stuff that they don't like, we see it come up 3 to 4 times a year. One of the popular attorneys in the esports scene, you can name them, will always come out and say, "Have one of us look at your contract. Let us go through it, explain it to you because you probably don't know what you're signing." And to me, this is another example of that. Like I just feel like personally the players were in the wrong in this situation, but I'm tying the players in with the CSPPA as kind of a
And
whole
I'm not
because
even
this
sure
was a
those two
bad
are on the
look.
same side in the situation.
That's the thing. That's why I'm like in the sense of they shouldn't have boycotted. The CSPPA probably shouldn't have gotten involved here and let the orgs handle this
And
with
I'm
their
not even sure, like,
players.
do y'all know how that happened? Was that like the players' decision to boycott, or was that the CSPPA telling their players to boycott?
Well, I think there's enough of the big players tied to the CSPPA where the players from that match. I think it was wasn't it Astralis in that first
and
match?
Mouse. It was
That was
Mouse and Astralis, and Chris J obviously is on the board
like a
for the Players
huge member.
Association.
Zipnix is
Oh,
also
So
on the
okay.
board, and so I think
Mm.
it's also part of like the teams that were playing in that first match were also heavily tied to the Players Association.
I just
So
feel like there had to have been a way to resolve this before day one of the tournament. Like there,
100%.
if players or the association of the players, if either one of those two parties involved were super duper concerned about their comms being, used in a way that could jeopardize competitive integrity, for one, I feel like the teams themselves should be on board with that
right.
because that's your team. Like, yeah, there's always going to be some type of disagreements, or there's different interests that play between the team, the organization, and then the team, the actual players that make up the roster. Sure, there's a lot of give and take there. Like that's why we have these crazy contract negotiations and whatnot. But at the end of the day, I think both those people can align that you don't want your team being jeopardized on their communications, tampering with competitive integrity. Like you want your roster to perform well, and the roster wants to perform well, right? So if that's the case, you should be able to come together on this and work with the TOs on, hey, like I know that we signed these agreements with you guys to give you certain access to our team for like media days and for shoulder content and all this stuff to help operate your product, but we do need to make sure that there's some safeguards in place to ensure that competitive integrity is maintained. And that should not have been a difficult conversation, I don't think. And so I don't know I don't know how it could have gotten to this point, I guess is my point. Like there must have been a gross like miscommunication that took place in this whole process to have caused it to blow up this much. It's like wild to me that it's got this bad.
I
It
think
doesn't seem like that big of a problem.
and what's funny is we've had players on before. Like we've had Nifty on the show and other players, and we've asked them straight up, like, do you as a player really know what the Players Association does? And even they're like, no. I mean, we'll occasionally hear from them. They'll occasionally ask for our input, but for the most part, we're seeing the decisions that they make the same time you are most of the time, like just on Twitter and everything. So it's a mess down from the get-go. I'm sure it was all started with great intentions. I don't think it's this evil corporation that half
No.
of Twitter and Reddit is trying to make it out to be. I just think it's, like you said, there's a lot of conversations that go on behind closed doors. Probably more conversation should happen behind closed doors. But the irony is if they never protested, if they didn't do the protest the other day before the match, this conversation and none of this would have happened. None of it. So it is funny
Now
how
everyone's slitting each other's
like
throat right now, and it's
all
only
these
gonna.
players and the CSPPA would have had these same exact contracts a week ago, but because this protest, now everyone's having issues with it. So it's, I look at it from
Kind of a
both
perfect
sides.
way to wrap up the year for Counter Strike, though. Counter Strike's had a tough year from start to finish. Obviously, COVID affects everybody, but Counter Strike in particular, with all the scandals with the, ESIC investigating and this almost feels like a
It's
perfect
just
kind of
like
bow to
of
end the
all the
year.
issues we've had in the scene, and none of them ever had protests, and then
This
this
is the
is the
one.
one.
Not
Give
your
me
tier
a
2 scene being
fucking
demolished.
break, bro. This is insane. This is the hill you want to die on.
Yep. Not Valve
Like,
banning people
and
for
like
years.
and again, I don't know if that's on the players or on the association or a combination of the two. I don't know if it's on the teams for not communicating with their, because according to the teams, they resolved this issue back in late November. Did
Right.
they fail to communicate that to their players? Like, there is like just some gross miscommunication here that caused all this, in
Well,
my opinion.
and the
But I
worst
don't know
thing
who's
is,
at fault. I have no idea.
I
Like,
and I agree with you. I think everyone is a little bit at fault. I think that's at the end of the day, everyone needs to take some ownership in this. The worst part about it to me though is that these players are acting like they're the victims by having their comms recorded when
Mhm.
like not 48 hours later or before we were just released a document showing all these players and it's like, look, everyone was cheating, so we can't punish any of you. Like, like you want like, well, why do you need to record our comms? Why do you need to know what we're doing? Well, because all of you are cheating. Like, that's why. And then now the players are protesting. It's just like, guys,
Yeah.
like you put up security cameras in a store because someone stole something. So then you're like, we need security. We need to beef up security. It's
Yeah.
like customers aren't going to protest to be like, well, I'm not going to go shop there then because you are
Yeah.
videotaping
That's another
me.
good point, by the way. I didn't even consider that, but that's certainly true. Like, it's not just for content; it's for like to make sure rules are being followed.
Yeah.
Yeah,
One of the best ways you can make sure that someone's not ghosting is to hear the communications, make sure no ghosting was going on.
yeah,
So yeah, I mean, like that's the other end of the competitive integrity argument. Like, yeah, you don't want to leak comms and jeopardize the team's like strategy and stuff like that, but you also need to protect it on the other side to make sure that nothing nefarious is going on. So yeah, I mean that's another big reason why this whole situation is like mind blowing to me how
We
it
could
got
have
this
handled
good.
that Cypher Cam issue a lot easier if we had comms for a lot of those. It's
Jesus,
like all
man.
5 of them were coming top mid. How did he know that?
Yeah,
Amazing.
yeah, wild.
Oh, well, dusT, I want to thank you for coming on.
Sure.
Before we let you go, I
Hmm.
do want to bring this up because I know you've been tweeting about it. I know it's personal and you're
Ooh.
passionate about it. So I want to give
Hmm.
you the time to say it on the show, just so our listeners are
Hmm.
also aware. But it
Hmm.
is 2020 and we're still dealing with this shit in esports. And it's
Yep.
very important to bring up. Pulse
Hmm.
Arena. Give me the
Yes.
skinny.
So basically, I got in touch with Pulse through Van Silly. He was like a fellow commentator. This is my
Friend
first
of the show.
casting gig in Valorant. So Van Silly, a shout out to him.
He was
He saw
on
that I was
a couple weeks
interested.
ago.
Yeah, he's a great dude. I know he's on here. But anyway, he knew that I was interested in doing Valorant, like as a commentator, and he wanted to help me get my first opportunity. So he got me in touch with Pulse, and I agreed to work their event, which was the one I did was Pulse Series. Now they had an event back in July called the Pulse Invitational, which is like kind of a bigger event. Like I think all the top teams were involved. There's like a 10K prize pool. It was a sizable event for North America. Like Cloud9, TSM Immortals, like all those teams were involved. That was back in July. But the one that I did was called Pulse Series, which is a little bit smaller event, and this was back in, I want to say October, maybe September. No, September. I'm sorry. It was like mid September, like the 10th through the 13th. So this is like what, like almost 3 full months ago now,
Hmm.
basically, when this event took
Wow.
place.
Yeah.
And this was like there was a couple of bigger teams involved, like Renegades and Complexity and like Luminosity and Beast Coast, but most of the teams were kind of smaller. And the prize pool was still pretty solid though, but it was just not as big of an event as far as prestige. But that's the event I worked, and a lot of different people worked, and you can go look it up on the Wikipedia and see all the people who were involved. Well, I usually operate under a net 30 system. So when I submit an invoice, I expect to be paid within 30 days of when I gave you the invoice, or maybe 30 business days if you want to like skip weekends or something like that. Usually I give companies a little bit of grace. I usually won't start poking and prodding, asking about the money until maybe it's like 2 weeks later, something like that. Then I'll like message like, hey, what's going on with this invoice? Just wanting to see if there's any updates on this invoice, that I submitted. Then once it like gets to about like an extra 30 days past due, that's whenever like, I start getting a little bit more aggressive maybe, where I'm just like, hey guys, net
The
30,
140
you're
characters
you've
maybe
doubled
coming out
that.
soon.
Yeah, like this is like I'm still not going nuclear or anything like that, but I am probably messaging you a couple of more times on email. And it always just depends on like how they respond to me. In
Right.
this case, I got nothing, zero response. So now supposedly, and I'll just say it now. This guy's name is Dan. Apparently, like Dan. I don't know his last name. Like it's in the article though that dotT Esports put out. But he's like the one that's like in charge or whatever. Maybe he's like the owner of Pulse. I'm not really sure, but he's the one that's supposed to be handling like payment. He was the email address I was supposed to email my invoice to. Put it that way. He told me to email him the invoice. So I expect if that's the case, you're the one responsible for giving me my money. So anyway, so yeah, this guy was communicating with other people, but wasn't communicating with me at all. Whenever I would try to email them, to this day, I have like 3 emails sent to him between today, which was whenever this is the December the 9th, and the end of I think the last time I would have spoke to him was also like towards the end of September, like maybe into mid-October or something like that. So I haven't gotten a message from this guy in like a month and a half or something like that, at least, if not more than that. And certainly he hasn't responded to any of my follow-up emails about getting paid. And from what I understand, no one's gotten paid from Pulse Series back in September. The teams haven't gotten their prize money. No other cashers have been paid. Northern Arena, the people who ran the production for the event, they have not been paid. And I'm not sure if anyone else is involved in not getting paid, but there could be. And then also, I'm going to go ahead and venture a guess, although I don't have any confirmation, that probably no one's gotten paid from that Pulse Invitational event back in July either, which includes more teams, more prize money, other casters. I think Northern Arena produced that one as well. So they're probably owed for both events, if I had to guess. Yeah, so just no one's gotten paid. This guy's gone radio silent, and we're all just sitting here waiting on our money. And it's just fucked because rumors were floating around that supposedly whatever investors this guy had lined up to get all the money that he needed to not only run these events, but also open up some type of like land center or something in New York or something like
Yeah, that's
that.
what I saw that they were.
Yeah. So supposedly that like fell through or there was issues with it because of COVID. I don't really know. Like apparently the money he thought he was going to get from investors, it didn't happen.
A
Or
land center during COVID was a bad idea?
yeah, I don't know. I don't understand like what it is. And then I mean, as early as November, they were tweeting that they were going to open next year. So I don't fucking know. Better not now. I'll come show up, and that's where my money is. Anyway, so yeah, so that apparently either got delayed or it's just not happening anymore as far as like the investor money he thought he was going to get. I don't know which it is. So supposedly he took out a second mortgage on his house, and that was how he was basically use that as like essentially a loan to basically pay all his debt and then maybe even open up his land center. I have no idea. That was the last thing I heard, and I kept hearing, "Oh, well, it's gonna get sorted out next week," and that it's gonna be sorted out next week has been like 4 weeks of it not still being sorted out. So at this point, I'm still not paid. No one's been paid, and it fucking sucks because it's Christmas time, so everyone's obviously trying to
Right.
get gifts for their family or whatever the case may be, and pay their normal bills. It's an expensive time of year in that regard. It's COVID, so also people are losing out on money because of that because gigs are less available, as particularly for a freelancer like myself. There's not as many opportunities as there used to be because of COVID. And so it's like, I got bills to pay, dude. So pay up. You know what I mean? And not just for me, but for everyone. And I know that other talent have been not as vocal because they don't want to burn the bridge. Maybe they were hoping to work with Pulse more in the future if this gets sorted out, or people involved with it. And I've been there as a CS:GO talent. I've been scared to speak out before because I didn't want to burn, a bridge or something like that. You always got to think about the long term. If you can sort it out, in the short term, even if you feel like you got kind of burned a little bit, at least you get your money in the end and you maintain a relationship. And maybe they even are a little bit happy with you that you didn't like,
Throw
out
'em under
them
the
or
bus.
yeah,
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 yeah, yeah.
yeah. Right. So I can understand that, but I'm too old and tired now to give a shit about that anymore. So it's
Well,
just
you've
like,
been around the block.
I'll take it on the chin for everyone. Like
Yeah.
I'll come out and I'm not pressuring anyone else to say anything publicly. That's your decision. But just know you don't have to worry about it. Like I'll go out and say something. And try to stand up for everyone because this is ridiculous. And I've seen this way too many times and I'm not doing it this time.
I mean,
It
good
is what it is.
good for you
With
too. Cause I
the
yeah,
amount of times
100%.
this happens in esports, I'm kind of curious, what is the next step for you guys, like, in these situations? Because it's not the first time it's happened. Like, do you take this into legal matters at this point? If it doesn't get paid off in however whatever timeline you set for yourself, or is it just kind of like, well, that sucks. I'm just never going to work with them, and you move on.
It depends. It's like state by state. So I didn't have like a technical contract, and I don't think anyone probably did, other than maybe Northern Arena because that was like a really big business deal. But most of us just had like email agreements, like this is the rate we'll give you. Do you agree to this? Yes, I agree to this. Okay, that's great. We'll book you for this. And so it's like it's in writing, but it's not like a legal document that was actually like notarized and signed or whatever the case may be, like an actual contract would be. That's not always the case. Like for example, when I worked for Nerd Street Gamers for the qualification process, first strike we had a written agreement that I signed, that they signed, and that is like a legal document that I could use if I ever had to, which I don't think I will because Nerd Street's pretty cool people. So, but in this case, there was just like an email agreement, which is kind of usually how it is. So that's on me. Should have had a legal contract. That's my fault. I'll take that one on the chin. But I do have an agreement that we both wrote to each other and agreed to a particular, thing. So some states might see that as legally bonding. Some might not. I'm not really sure. Like I'm not like a legal expert. Um, but the bottom line is like, yeah, I guess eventually you would have to take it to court. Well, then that's like a long process. That's also going to cost a lot of money, maybe more money than what I would actually even wind up getting paid out in the
Yeah,
end.
yeah.
And it's like a disc. And here's the other problem is if this guy did this all under an LLC, then he can just bankrupt the business and it doesn't affect his personal finances at all. And then he just starts up a new company or something like that. And that company is just kaput and there's no money there. And so you don't get anything. So, I mean, I've seen that situation play out before where someone just, bankrupts an LLC and just moves on with their lives. And they're not, that individual that ran it is not like legally, I guess,
Responsible. Yeah,
responsible
yeah.
for it. So I mean, at the end of the day, yeah, I guess you could take it legally. Like you could get a lawyer to send them an official letter and then take it to court in some way. But I don't know that I don't know if I would have a hill to stand on because I don't have like an actual contract. And because again, like I don't know if you could just skate out of there and just like end the business or something like that. Like I'm not really sure how that works. So at this point, it's just is this guy gonna do the right thing or not? You know.
Right. Right. I mean, look, I hope you definitely get
I'll tell you
paid.
this guy will never work in esports if he doesn't pay me. I'm gonna tell you that right now. I will make it my personal mission where this guy never does anything in this space.
Well,
Like
none of the talent's gonna work for him unless there's friends at
no,
that point. So
Yeah.
no. His shit's gonna be out there. This guy's getting if this guy thought he was gonna have a future in this space, he better pay us first. Because otherwise he's not getting anywhere. I will hawk this guy down. I don't mean that like physically violent or something like that, but
no,
I
but
will
you
make
should. You should
sure
go violent with it. We would be
yeah,
interested to see that.
I'm just saying that if this guy, I will literally like, I'm not letting this go. Like, I'll be post like that Paul Serena social media account's gonna get dragged through the mud forever until this gets solved.
Hey,
And then
it
if
worked with
he makes
Blast
a
and Neom, right? Like
yep, and
everyone
then
wouldn't
listen,
let
and
it
if this
go.
guy tries to go make a new company and start over, I'm gonna be on that ass too. So you're this is not going away, bro. That's all I'm gonna tell him if he listens to this. Like, it's not going away. You need to solve this, and you at least need to communicate with us. Like the fact that
Yeah.
you're going radio silence, unbelievable.
That's what I was gonna say. It's like paying is obviously the end goal, but for crying out loud, like
Like
send an
reply.
email, let them
Yeah.
let you know what's going on, and like you said, you seem like a very patient, reasonable guy. Like if he just
I like to
tells
think
you,
I am.
yeah, if he just tells you what's up, then maybe you're like, okay, at least I know now. Still want
Yeah.
my money, but at least
Mhm.
I know.
Yeah. Just be like, hey, I'm waiting for this. Hey, I'm waiting for that. Now, don't
Yeah,
get me wrong. If you keep doing that over and over again, eventually I'm going to realize that you're just making some shit up. But
right.
yeah, this guy didn't even put forth the effort of making some shit up. He didn't
He
even do
can't
that.
even lie.
He just didn't say anything. It's unbelievable. Just lie. Just say, do something. It's nothing. It's It's I've never had this. Is just he just like ghosts like he doesn't even exist. He just moonwalks
Just
out.
done.
Like I said, apparently he's communicated with some of the other people involved, which I won't name because I don't know if they want to be named. But apparently he has communicated. I know he at least communicated with the guy from the Spike or whatever, because that guy even like posted out like a chat log from Discord or something like that on
Yeah.
Twitter. So he's apparently communicated with that guy. I still haven't gotten an email though. And I think some of the other talent haven't received communication either. So yeah, dude, I don't know. This guy's a piece of shit.
Probably got a lot of replies to return over there. I'm
And I'm
guessing on
sure
his
his
part.
inbox is banging.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, obviously, we hope that turns out in your favor. Before
Yeah,
we,
I would too. I have bills that I'd like to pay. So
yeah,
hopefully that
definitely, definitely would help. Definitely would help getting a paycheck that you worked for. Before
Yeah,
we let
would
you
be good.
go, if we could just get a liner from you, it's a audio autograph, if you will. If you want to just state your name and you're listening to the Center Ring.
Hi, this is dusT, and you're listening to the Center Ring.
Perfect. First
Lovely.
take, no stutters. You'd be surprised how many people struggle with that. But you're a
all good.
professional.
I guess so.
That's just you're a professional.
We'll go with that.
All right, dusT. Well, thank you again for joining us. I mean, like I said, we've always been fans of yours. We'd love to have you on the show sometime in the future.
Sure.
Wish you nothing but the best in all your future endeavors, and thanks again.
Appreciate you.
And if you're not checking it out already, go check out his Behind the Play. That's your YouTube series that you're doing, right? If I'm not
Yep.
mistaken. Awesome. So go check that out. I know you also stream. You've probably been playing a lot of Valorant, it looks like. So go give him a follow and check him out on there. But yeah, dude, seriously, thank you so much for coming on. I know it was on short notice and loved having you on the show, and hopefully we get to do it again soon.
Absolutely. It was a lot of fun. Thanks
What
a lot.
rank? What rank are we in Valorant?
I'm floating in the plat range, so yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so we can at least group together.
Struggling,
We're right.
struggling.
We're right below you.
We're like gold
We're
2,
sitting
gold
in the high
3.
To be fair, I've solo queued, I would say like 95% of the time, so
Yeah.
it's been a struggle.
We double
That's the
queue.
boat
It's
we're
just
in.
us pretty much the whole time. But
It's
we're
been a struggle.
WoW has dampened it a little bit. We won't lie. WoW has
Oh lord,
dipped into our Valorant time, but
nah.
we'll get back on it. We'll get back
We'll
on
get
it.
back on the grind.
All right, all right.
All right,
Take
dude.
care, buddy.
Take care.
Thank
Take it
you.
easy.